Hello, everybody, and welcome to another episode of the DXM podcast. I am Colborn Bell, and I am honored to be joined today by artist Ricci Albenda. Thank you for coming on the program.
Absolutely, my pleasure.
Yeah, so we start these shows everywhere in the same place, and that is just giving you the space to introduce yourself in the manner that you best see fit.
I'm just an artist, I guess an artist, and branching out into some digital work that I've wanted to really do for decades, but haven't really had a platform. So some of these ideas that are coming out now have been like percolating for a very long time.
Yeah, that is very humble. I won't go into your background, but it's just incredible. I think a very enviable career for a lot of people that could be listening, and the work itself is stunning. So in all instances, I encourage everybody to get out there and do their own research. Do you want to maybe take us back to, the early days, what it was perhaps like coming out of RISD, what New York City was like in these times, and what was exciting you artistically?
Okay, sure. Let's see. I remember coming out of school, coming to New York, walking around, going to see shows, trying to think about what I wanted to do. And I remember two things stick out pretty strongly that might refer to what I'm doing now. One was that, the most powerful work I'm seeing is mostly advertising. The human body, the bold text, messages, these things were like more powerful to me than some of the more academic stuff that was going on, in art at the time. So I felt like, it was important for me to like try and put my energy towards finding a way to like root that into, art making. And, one of the ways it did was that, text started coming into my work a little bit. And I found like that was carrying a lot of the power. And then, it's so cheesy, but I had a dream, and in my dream, the sort of like the answer came to me, like what was the most important thing to do as an art, and I was still sort of an art student mindset. So in my dream, I was a student. It was an assignment, and the answer was that to bring a story, that the concept of story was the most important thing, and to somehow tell a story as concisely as possible. And in my dream, the answer was a single word, and the word was honest. Honest being, in some way, the implication was like, you say go, like, and the implication is that you say you go. Well, the implication of saying the word honest was like, blah, 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 this is the story of my life, honest, just like this idea of the intentionality of it being sincere or whatever. And so, that was like the first word on its own that I painted. And that kind of started the whole, trajectory of doing paint words and trying to capture not really so much the story. That was just kind of the lead in. It's more about taking the label of something that, theoretically is reducible to a single nit of, or a data, single nit of information. That's actually this whole wealth of information because of not only connotations, but because of the connotations of certain segments of the word. Different letter combinations have different associations because they're in lots of other words, or because they relate to some ancient language, or, whatever it is. And to kind of develop the kind of world of the single label. And then after working on that for a while, I came to this this drawing that was just a doodle, but I saw in it something really important, which was, again, a story. We do these kind of square-like doodles. Here's one right now, just doing, but instead of being a square, they kind of like fed off of each other. and they became this kind of perspectival unfolding of space. And I realized that's like a story. That's like taking the idea of like, you know, the stock graphs or echocardiogram. That's just, you know, the pacing of your life as it moves forward. But then the projecting into kind of a third dimension, or even two more dimensions, height and well, not height, because the thing goes, yeah, I guess it's just a third dimension of depth.
Right.
I don't know. It was something that I went with, and it spewed out a whole bunch of works related to that.
You know, I've been doing a fair bit of just dream study lately, looking at you know, the symbols and the words, and it's funny that, you know, this came to you in this way, but I think there is something inherently probing of the subconscious about your work that I don't know if it's particularly like an American advertising context. But these are so many phrases that we've repeated to ourselves, that we've internalized. So,
oh, definitely.
So when I see one of your works, I immediately have like some internal dialogue, some pre-position to this work, to this phrase, to this statement.
Absolutely.
I find that very powerful.
Yeah, no, that's actually a big part of this sort of the dialectic of the work, because on the one hand, it's this incredibly materialistic thing because it's so precisely painted and addresses gravity in these ways, you know, the serifs and this kind of like a, you know, an architectural quality to the font itself, right. But at the same time is a kind of a dematerialized artwork because it enters the mind and it kind of like leaves with you and it stays there like a song stuck in your head or something like that. And so that was actually a really important part of the work. Again, you know, when you've been doing something for so many years, some of the most basic, you know, important aspects of them become so automatic that you forget that that's part of the work. But that was sort of like early on a really important part of the work, the idea that it was like something that was, you know, outside of the physical, that it was, you know, inside of you.
And I can imagine what it would be like to live with these works and like sit with these mantras and really go deep into the intentionality. I think especially in a day and age like today, where there's so much digital clutter, where there's so much spam, where there's so much trash, just like the simplicity and, you know, the like the art as the object, as the mantra in that reductionism is, I would imagine living with this work to be very nice.
Cool. Well,
one day, perhaps. Do you want to, maybe we can talk about Breathe?
Sure. We can definitely talk about Breathe. The original Breathe or the recent project that I did?
Well, as you wish. Let's trace it. Yeah.
Yeah, it's Breathe was one of the earlier works I did as well, and one of the things I really liked about Breathe, I really like silent letters. It's another thing where, like, I guess it's similar to that dialectic between the material and this like immaterial, because the silent letter is material on the page, but it's immaterial in your mind. But it's not like, at least for me, when I pronounce two words that are spelled differently but pronounced the same, I feel them differently inside. So anyway, Breathe has this silent E, which changes it from breath to breathe, obviously, and kind of creates this kind of sustain that pulls you through, which gives it a quality that, you know, breath is like a feather floating by, and breathe is like this. It's a non-physical thing. I can't, you know, I couldn't create a physical metaphor for it because it kind of evades physical metaphor. It's just like it's a continuity.
It is an onomatopoeia into itself, right? It has that
I think it has a certain onomatopoetic energy to it. I mean, it doesn't sound, you know, breathe doesn't sound like breathing, but yes, I think there is. To me, there is. And I think sometimes that does happen. I think sometimes that's an illusion, like you're so connected to the meaning that you imbue the sound of the word with some kind of sensory, you know, or tactile parallel to the concept, and maybe it's not actually there, but the brain creates it. I have always been connected to that word, so I I've done a lot of iterations of it, from like really tiny ones to one that's like 18 by 12 feet tall. When I had a chance to finally do a series of paintings that would trace the development of the work and kind of like take one painting and break it up into several, I chose the word breathe. And so I did this series of 4 paintings where I started with one on a kind of a vellum material that's kind of transparent, translucent, and finished it to like, you know, level 1 or whatever. And then I set it out and I traced it down with another piece of vellum. And then I took that painting as if it were the other and I took it to the next level. And I did that until I got to the 4th one, which I then finished. And then when I did all of them, I did go back and finish them all. But I recorded each one in the different ways. And you know, they all kind of developed differently after that. So this was kind of the perfect project to use for the time-lapse project, which was another idea that I'd had. So I kind of married these 2 different ideas into one idea. The paintings start out very, you know, rough and scrappy if I don't use a stencil, which I no longer. Kate, for a while, I was using stencils to supposedly save time, but actually it takes more time. And yeah, they get to this point where even though you can't see when you're on top of the painting how the change affects the composition, when you step back, somehow, you know, the sort of like, I don't know, the way you perceive things is elusive, but you might not be able to see a detail up close because it's imperceptible, but it affects the flow of a curve of a line or you know, the massing of like something that's so subtle that it's not accessible to the sort of conscious mind, but it is accessible to the kind of like the forest mind, right? And you see the thing in a better way. And so I wanted to try and like kind of, I mean, I wanted to capture it. I don't think I did because the resolution of the screen just isn't, you know, at the point where you could really capture that. Although you'd be surprised, like changing 1 pixel from, you know, a 254 gray to a 253 gray would not be perceptible up close, but you step back, even though the resolution of the painting is much finer, it changes that 1 pixel from 254 gray to 252 gray or whatever, and maybe it would still work. And I don't really know, but I don't think that's one ambition that we didn't really achieve in this project, but it still addresses the whole idea that you move from like these big changes to this kind of like imperceptible changes that are still, you know, purposeful. So yeah, that's sort of how the Breathe project kind of panned out. I actually would love to do another one with kind of a higher resolution film and maybe even in stereoscope. That's something that's sitting on the back of my, on one of many back burners.
Can I ask what was the motivation to move into the digital? I think you answered some of it, but
you know, there wasn't really a motivation. I've always liked digital. I mean, in the you know, in the 80s, I spent weeks on end just designing like little icons for the computer. I don't know if you probably remember, but
I do.
In the early Apple, the colors would change when you clicked on them. And so there were some colors that would change and some colors that would not. And if you did it just right, you could have like a blank screen.
Yeah.
And if you click on it, suddenly there's a face. And I did a lot of, I just was so into it. But there was no market for it. I mean, I eventually I thought I wanted to do a show of all my icons. I mean, I had hundreds of them. You know, they would have been like perfect NFTs. They're pretty much lost at this point. But you know, I didn't have an outlet. So in a way, I've been doing digital art the whole time. It's just that you know, it was more like almost like a hobby because it didn't have. It wasn't marketable. But I certainly tried to show it to whoever would watch or look. Yeah.
Are NFTs a compelling medium for you? I mean, are there certain aspects maybe around like price transparency or secondary sale royalties or?
There are lots of reasons why I think NFTs are really interesting. Those 2 are part of it, but also one of the things that excites me the most is the things that I haven't thought of yet that can be done with it. For one example, I had this idea. I lost a pet about 5-6 years ago, and it was pretty traumatic for me. But I spent many years after that, trying to think of a way to sort of commemorate my loss, or not my loss, but commemorate their life. My dog's name was Albert, and there's this thing called a dwarf Alberta spruce, and Albert was a Chihuahua, and so dwarf Alberta spruces have this thing, they revert to their parent plant, which is a large Alberta spruce, and it's a very specific species, just one that had this mutation that made it dwarf. So anytime it reverts, it's this one tree that they found in Alberta, 60 years ago. And I thought, okay, I'm going to commemorate my dog by collecting these reversions and creating seedlings, not seedlings, whatever they, new trees, clones, that would grow into these giant trees. So they would be like, in my mind, like a giant among dwarfs. My dog was a giant among dwarfs. And so then I thought, oh, one could make an NFT where you pair a kind of like photo montage of his life with one of these sprouts, and you sell an edition of 12, and that the edition can fork after a certain number of years. You can take a cutting of your tree, and you can sell, 4 or 2 or however the math would work out. You could keep one and sell one, or keep one and sell 3. But in order to sell the montage, which was the sort of digital aspect, you would have to go through the process of doing this very, very difficult cloning evergreens, especially conifers, is very difficult. So it would be like this weird kind of like it's an investment, because you could, repay on dividends a few years down the road, but you have to put in this very loving kind of work to do so. So it's not just like, it's a participatory thing. Like how could you do that without, I guess you could do anything and just sort of imagine that, whatever context, not context, whatever structure that the NFTs allow for. But that's not the same thing. It's like when the medium kind of invites those kinds of innovations. So that's something that's exciting to me. I had an idea yesterday about like getting $1,000 in $10 bills and cutting them in half and handing them out randomly, and then people have to find their other half to cash them in. And I thought that could be like very, applicable to the NFT space, because, you could have 2 parts that if you, join them, then they become, cash money. But at the same time, there's this other idea. Well, are they more valuable as the cash money, or are they more valuable as the concept? And so what do? Do you meet your person and cash out and get your money, or do you keep it? And how does the royalties work? And there's all these different, like, as a person who loves systems, the NFT space is a great opportunity to sort of like play with the system itself of the distribution and the nature of value. So yes, I have this other project where I do these paintings where it's a series of paintings. It's called the chrysanthemums, and they always stay the same proportion in the front. But they get to any size, and they can go from microscopically small to big enough to cover half the face of the moon, theoretically. And the dimensions of the depth of them change depending on the thing. And there's these elaborate mathematical graphs that do it. That's kind of like that's cool for making real paintings in the real world at a certain time. But like, what if you wanted to buy one that you could put on the moon? Well, in the digital space, you could get one. And although you can't put it on the real moon, you can put it on the moon in some metaversal space that has moons in it.
Totally.
And, or, microscopically, it would be really, in my project, the price is like, sort of zeroes out at a certain size. Actually, I have the pieces. These are just some pieces. This one is like the cheapest side. It's pretty thick.
Right.
And this one is like a lot more expensive. It's smaller. That's the front face. But in the side, it's like a sculpture. Does that make sense?
Amazing. Yeah.
So, and the graph is, this cool like graph that shows how it all works. Anyway, the point is that, as a real object, yes, it would be a nightmare for me to make this. That's why it's more expensive. And as you get smaller and smaller, you're getting into microscopic things.
Right.
That's cool, and that was the original idea. But I realized later that it's also a great place for the NFT space, where you could have, of course, the price wouldn't relate. The prices would all be the same, or maybe there would be price relationships, but I don't know what they would be. You'd have to think about that.
Yeah.
So yes.
Well, I mean,
about the NFT space for those reasons.
Yeah, as far as just clearly sparking more creativity and like limitless imagination, I think it's just invited a lot of people to the table of what is possible. And then I think also the ability to foster interactions, connections, make those recorded, see and explore different types of interactivity and the social dynamics of all of this. It's been just so fascinating to observe and participate in.
Absolutely. And the other thing, just the most basic thing, is that it's a space. Yeah. Right. So whenever you have a new space, that's like, that's what, in a way, all art really is about understanding space and exploring space, whatever kind of space that is, whether it's pictorial space, or three-dimensional space, or some narrative space. I mean, there's everything that exists, has to unfold in a certain kind of space, and understanding how that space, at least for me as an artist, that's always been like one of my most passionate interests is understanding the nature of a given space.
And digital space, of course, is so boundless, asynchronous.
Yeah, right? And there's so many different ways of thinking about it. It's like we're just doing a website for this piece, and I had this thought, like, well, maybe it shouldn't be all hyperlinked. What if it was like, this vast page, just one vast page that you would just kind of drag around in. It would be just kind of like navigating this like two-dimensional, like, desert, finding things that get further and further away from the core, that's just like all clinging to this kind of like, nav bar that's in the middle. And then I was like, well, what if on the other side of the nav bar there was like this like inaccessible like antimatter, universe that was part of the website, but you couldn't get to it, or, depending randomly when you got online, you'd end up on one side or the other, but you couldn't see both at one time, and you'd have to log back on. I don't know. There's all these different things that can happen when you're dealing with different kinds of space.
Right. Absolutely. Something we haven't touched on that's obviously relating to this upcoming project is your color studies.
Yeah, totally. And that's a big one. The color kind of, I've always been like a really, really into color, but ironically for, almost, for several years when I was doing the words, I was really insistent on not using color, because I was interested in the words as words, and color is on top of the words. It's not intrinsic to its wordness. So why would you introduce color? Then it just becomes a design element, and it's not really about what the work is about. But then, another like epiphany, I just realized, well, if every letter was, if you were to make it that color was integrated into the text or the alphabet in such a way that there was no weighting of it and they weren't making a choice, then it would work. And then so I had this realization you could map the alphabet onto the spectrum. So, A to Z, again, this idea of the narrative, like from left to right or right to left or whatever, that there's like this unfolding, there's this kind of linear transformation that relates to time. Well, the alphabet could lay onto the spectrum in that way. And so I did that, and then started opening up my interest in color more. And then, started this, then, at a certain point, I realized, well, that's all well and good, but, the alphabet is used by everyone and it needs to be universal. How can everyone use this, but still do their advertisements and have a red headline? So I was like, well, because the original system was called Color I Me Try, it's like a joke on colorimetry. And then I came up with universal color, which was to create a color space where you could sort of like take whatever, mapping that the colors of the word would be in the color I me try system, and then kind of slide them to the reds or slide them to the blues or towards the blacks or the whites. So you could basically have a monochromatic word that was still polychromatic. It would just be kind of expressing these both things. And that got me into deeper and deeper kind of color theory study, and then breaking down the colors into, just trying to reanalyze how color works. And so I have an extensive body of color theory work, and my color system is based largely on what is it called? Not simultaneous. Optical mixture. You have today's retina screens are perfect for doing the kinds of studies I do, because you can just make a checkerboard in these pixels and it still reads as a single color. So it's really great for developing these color theories. And then I just started, getting into color symbolism, and the clock thing happened, and, north, south, east, west, and a variety of other kind of like elemental ideas that could map to color. And that's where the clock came from. And so, like I said, I thought of the clock probably a decade ago, and I certainly met with a few people trying to get it off the ground, but between my lack of software skills and lack of I don't know, I wasn't able to get anyone on board to kind of push it forward, and I just kept kind of developing it in the background until fortunately I mentioned it to Jackie over at DMINTI, and she was like, "This sounds amazing. We have to do this." So that's how it happened.
So I will shamelessly plug that we are hosting a 24-hour event around the color clock here at the MoCA Church. It'll be the first live programming that I have done in this building.
Amazing.
So I'm super excited. I know everybody's super excited, and that will be at the end of April. Should we talk more about what the color clock is?
Yeah, absolutely. The color clock is, well, first of all, the color system, as I said, it's not just linear. The alphabet is linear, but at a certain point, I thought it would be, the alphabet just goes the spectrum, but then between red and blue is magenta, which takes the spectrum and makes it into a color wheel. And the alphabet is 26 letters. My color system is 30 colors. So the clock has 30 sections, and those are hues, right? So, magenta can be anything from mauve to like blinding magenta to just like a very pale pinkish white. They're all going to be, 6 p.m. in the color system. But what I wanted to do for the clock was to kind of like take that kind of like, conceptual base and kind of like pad it out with a more metaphoric, intuitive experience of how the color and the time of day relate. First of all, so what I did was I took a grayscale, and I kind of did like a sine curve, which is like, I don't know if mathematicians will know that a sine curve is kind of like a stretching out of the cycle. Like if you take a spring and you pull it open, you'll get a sine curve. So that's what a sine curve really is. So I did a sine curve basically from white to black, actually not white to black, but light gray to dark gray. That was symmetrical, perfectly symmetrical, so that sunset and sunrise, theoretically, 6 p.m. is not necessarily sunset, sunrise, would be kind of this middle gray and would be identical to each other. And there'd be a symmetry from sunrise and sunset, or 6 p.m., 6 a.m. And there'd be a sort of an opposition from noon to midnight. I'll just throw in an aside here is that the color clock is not just a clock, it's also a calendar. So the year also has this exact same idea, except that, I haven't created specific colors that I think are most appropriate for that particular thing. They might turn out to be the same. I haven't really I haven't given it a ton of thought. You know, once this became possible to do, like originally my color clock, like the one that was on my desktop when this whole thing started, was my alphabetic system, which is where everything is balanced, same value, same intensity, so that when you're reading it as text on a page, nothing's jumping out. It all starts still like lies nice and flat on the page. But for the actual color clock, I wanted to do something a little bit more, you know, juiced up and different from the text idea. So where was I? What am I getting at here? I guess that's pretty much it. I mean, then of course I reworked it after that. I actually have paperwork notes, like waking up at 4 a.m. Oh, this is too bright, this is too dark, this is too this is too that. And actually it's still not totally resolved. And one of the things that I made really clear, you know, with DMINTI when we went forward is that, you know, the actual colors of the base system, they need to be upgradable, because I'm still working out what's like just the right, you know, like again, I said, any turquoise color from the palest to nearly black is 4 a.m. But I want there to be a sort of like a prototypical, like, you know, sine curve one that kind of represents something more just like what you'd imagine the color to be, or what I imagine the color to be. Yeah. So still working on that. The bright colors, those should stay the same. Like the clock has the each edition. There's a sort of a parallel clock underneath the hood of the clock, which is like basically the brightest hue or the brightest color of any given hue for a specific time that that can be expressed within the medium that's expressing it. So I created like an sRGB set for the internet, and also a P3. Is it called P3? It's a little bit, there's another letter in there, but you know, like the new Apple screens, the wider gamut. So I did both of those. You know, eventually there could be, you know, even wider gamuts, but essentially those colors will never change. Those are just the brightest possible hue for the system as it stands. But yeah, the base colors will evolve a bit, and that's I guess. Yeah.
And I had, I had talked about living with your work, and we're really going to live with this one for 24 hours straight.
Yeah.
It's exciting, and I'm excited to see just how it all comes alive in this space.
Yeah, that'll be fun. I guess I should just make it clear that, because I feel like it's been generally slightly unclear, that each edition is like named a specific minute, and when that minute comes along, the bright version of the color pops on your particular NFT screen, or it doesn't have to be a screen. I'm looking into like figuring out how to like manipulate like the DMX lighting thing so that you could have like just a light that would be connected to the NFT. It's the NFT really is like a set of colors.
Amazing.
But yeah, when your minute comes up, it's like you can toggle it so it goes on, or you can just keep it like a basic clock, and that's it.
Beautiful. Well, how about we continue on a non-linear exploration of time? Yeah. I am curious, first, what was it like to have a solo show at MoMA?
Doing the project at MoMA was pretty intense. It was really intimidating. and I remember there was like, it was really hard to get. I had to do these architectural drawings and didn't know exactly how to do it. And then I walked in, and there was this one shadow that was supposed to connect perfectly with the corner of a ceiling wall. And there was a clip light right where the shadow and the wall were supposed to connect. And I was too intimidated to say, can we take that clip light off? I got to make sure that the shadow connects. But I thought like, oh, well, if it's off, it'll be off by this or whatever. But the architect that we'd hired to do the drawings for me had made a 4-inch mistake. It'd be 4 inches instead of a 1/4 inch. And so it was off by like this much. And I had to like take a piece of wood and put it in front of the light so it would cast the shadow in a different place so it all connected. It was really crazy. But working in a situation like that is, it's pretty intimidating.
Yeah, I can imagine.
Yeah.
I can imagine.
But it was, they were great. It was great. I was super happy about it. And aside from that one thing, everything came out as well as I could ever have hoped. So
Amazing.
yeah.
I think, my last question is, there's a lot of young artists who listen to this. And you already spoke kind of around like finding your intentionality or, the inspiration for what would become a large part of your practice. I'm wondering if you just have any advice in this day and age for artists that are trying to be seen and get their work out there.
I suspect that the best way to do that is to get yourself out there and meet people and talk to people, because you're the agent of your exposure in that way. I don't know of any other kind of ways of doing it. Like, just make friends, friends in your own peer group. I think ultimately, that the people who are going to appreciate what you're doing are going to be in your own peer group. I know that maybe when I was a young artist, I thought it would be somehow valuable to seek out established people to try and get some kind of traction. But in the end, it was really my peer group that helped me kind of develop, the career aspect of my work. And just, those are the people who are putting together scrappy shows or whatever. Those are not like the artists that I most admired. They're just, it's just a different, I don't know, it's practical.
I think that's super, super advice. I think a lot of, especially in something as volatile as this, right? To be able to have that peer group to go back to have that validation from other artists. I think that is just really invaluable.
They're also the ones who are going to actually get it,
Yeah.
And they're the ones who are going to say, oh, well, what if you did this? That are actually going to help you kind of grow, the make it more sophisticated.
Would love to give you any last words. If there's anything you want to share, if you want to let people know where they can find you or your work, or
come to the the upstate.
Yeah.
I know the invite says you have to RSVP, so that's a little intimidating, but
you can send me a message.
RSVP anyway if you're not sure you can make it, and
yeah.
Then if you can't make it, you can't make it.
Yeah, I love that. All right. I'll say it's been a real honor. It's been a real pleasure having you. I really, really appreciate the time. I learned a lot, and thank you so much for sharing. And I think it'll be invaluable for everybody. For your first podcast, I thought you did great.
Thanks, great. I'm looking forward to meeting you in person.
Cheers. I'm Colborn Bell. We were joined by artist Ricci Albenda. Thank you, DMINTI, for putting us together, and we will see everybody next time.
Breaking news.